The radio crackled with static, then silence. Command had been dark for 17 minutes, an eternity when you're pinned down in hostile territory with ammunition running low and the sun bleeding crimson across the Afghan mountains. Staff Sergeant Marcus Tank Rodriguez pressed his back against the crumbling stone wall, feeling the vibration of incoming mortar rounds through his chest plate. His team of 8 Navy SEALs had been compromised 3 clicks from the extraction point, and their air support had vanished like smoke in the wind. "Where the hell is our angel?" whispered Petty Officer Blake Harrison, his voice barely audible through the comm system. The 24-year-old from Tennessee had never seen a mission go this sideways, and the tremor in his hands betrayed his growing panic. Tank had seen that look before, the wide-eyed realization that elite training meant nothing when the sky above you was empty and hostile forces were closing in from 3 directions. The mission had started clean. Intelligence suggested a high-value target was holed up in a compound near the Pakistani border, and the 8-man team was supposed to be in and out before dawn. But intelligence, as Tank had learned in his 12 years of service, was often more fiction than fact. The compound wasn't abandoned. It was a trap. Now they were surrounded by an estimated 40 Taliban fighters with heavy weapons, and their F-16 support had mysteriously gone offline. "Control, this is Sabre 6-1, requesting immediate air support," Tank spoke into his radio, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them. "We are under heavy fire and need immediate extraction." Only static answered back. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Air support didn't just disappear. Fighter jets didn't simply vanish from radar screens without explanation. Tank had coordinated dozens of operations in his career, and this level of communication breakdown was unprecedented. Either command had been hit, or something far more sinister was unfolding. The youngest member of their team, Hospital Corpsman Zara Akafer, was treating a shrapnel wound on Petty Officer James "Wrench" Sullivan when she looked up at Tank with questioning eyes. At 22, she'd already proven herself in 2 deployments, but this was different. This felt like abandonment. "Sir," she said quietly, "what if they're not coming?" Tank didn't answer immediately. He was scanning the ridge line through his scope, counting muzzle flashes and calculating their dwindling options. The enemy had positioned themselves expertly, using the terrain to create overlapping fields of fire. Without air support, his team would be overwhelmed within the hour. That's when they heard it, a sound that shouldn't exist, a whisper of displaced air, so subtle it could have been the wind. But Tank knew better. He'd heard that sound only once before, during a classified briefing at Nellis Air Force Base. The sound of something invisible cutting through the atmosphere. The desert wind carried dust across their position as Tank raised his binoculars toward the empty sky. His pulse quickened as he realized that perhaps they hadn't been abandoned after all. Perhaps something else entirely was watching over them, something the enemy couldn't see coming. The radio silence suddenly felt less like abandonment and more like anticipation. 47 Taliban fighters had surrounded Sabre 6-1's position by 3:47 hours, their confidence growing with each passing minute of American silence. Ahmed Nazir, the local commander, positioned his men with tactical precision honed through years of guerrilla warfare. He'd learned to read the patterns of American operations, their reliance on air power, their predictable extraction routes, their technology that could be jammed or disrupted. Tonight felt like victory. Through his Soviet-era binoculars, Nazir watched the Americans huddled behind their makeshift cover. 8 soldiers against 47. The odds were mathematical certainty. His RPG teams had the high ground, his machine gun nests commanded the valley floor, and his intelligence network had confirmed that American air assets were grounded due to a technical malfunction at Bagram Airfield. What Nazir didn't know was that Lieutenant Colonel Artemis "Ghost" Volkov was already overhead. At 31,000 feet above the Hindu Kush, the F-35A Lightning II moved through the darkness like a phantom given steel and wings. The aircraft's radar signature was smaller than a golf ball, its engine noise dampened to whispers, its advanced sensors painting a complete picture of the battlefield below while remaining utterly invisible to enemy radar systems. Ghost had earned her call sign not for her stealth aircraft, but for her ability to appear when least expected and disappear just as quickly. Born Artemis Volkov to a Russian immigrant father and Native American mother in rural Montana, she'd grown up hunting elk in conditions that would challenge seasoned survival experts. The military had initially viewed her 54 frame and quiet demeanor as limitations, but 12 years of service had proven them catastrophically wrong. She'd graduated top of her class from the Air Force Academy, completed the grueling F-35 training program ahead of schedule, and accumulated 847 combat hours across 3 deployments. Yet somehow, desk officers still whispered that she'd advanced due to diversity quotas. Tonight would be another data point in a career spent proving doubters wrong. "Control, this is Ghost, entering the battle space," she transmitted on an encrypted frequency that bypassed standard military communications. Her mission wasn't officially happening. The F-35 program's capabilities were still classified, and plausible deniability was essential. The aircraft's distributed aperture system fed her a 360-degree view of the terrain below, each Taliban position highlighted in her helmet's display like pins on a digital map. Advanced targeting algorithms had already calculated optimal engagement sequences, but Ghost preferred to make her own tactical decisions. Machines could process data, but only a pilot could read the human elements of warfare. She identified the enemy's command post, their heavy weapons emplacements, and the precise location where Sabre 61 was pinned down. The SEAL's infrared signatures appeared as faint blue outlines on her display, their heat signatures distinguishable from the enemy through advanced friend or foe identification systems. Tank Rodriguez had no idea that salvation was circling 6 miles above his head. The silence stretched longer, punctuated only by the distant crack of rifle fire and the occasional whistle of incoming mortars. Ghost studied the tactical situation with the patience of a predator. 47 enemies weren't just numbers on her display. They were human beings with families, beliefs, and reasons for fighting. But they'd made the choice to engage American forces, and she'd sworn an oath to bring those forces home alive. Her targeting computer chimed softly, indicating optimal firing solutions. Ghost's finger hovered over the weapon selection menu, choosing her arsenal with surgical precision. The battle was about to change in ways that would be discussed in classified briefing rooms for decades to come. "Sabre 61, this is your guardian angel," Ghost's voice cut through the static on Tank's radio, clear as mountain spring water. "Stay low and trust the lightning." Tank's eyes snapped upward to the star-filled sky, seeing nothing but darkness. But he recognized the tone, calm, professional, lethal. Someone was out there, someone with capabilities he couldn't begin to imagine. The first explosion lit the eastern ridge like a miniature sunrise. A Taliban machine gun nest that had been raining death on their position simply ceased to exist, vaporized by a precision-guided munition that had appeared from nowhere. The secondary explosion sent ammunition cooking off in brilliant orange streamers across the mountainside. "Holy shit," whispered Corpsman Akaffer, her medical training momentarily forgotten as she stared at the destruction. What was that? Tank had never seen anything like it. No aircraft signature, no warning, no sound of approaching ordnance. The enemy position had simply been deleted from existence with mathematical precision. A second explosion followed, then a third, each one eliminating a specific threat with surgical accuracy. Above them, Ghost banked her F-35 in a gentle turn, her advanced sensors tracking the remaining enemy positions. The aircraft's 25 MGAU-22 cannon was loaded and ready, but she preferred the precision of her guided missiles for this kind of work. Each shot was calculated not just for lethality, but for psychological impact. The Taliban fighters were beginning to panic. Their communications discipline crumbled as reports flooded in about positions being destroyed by invisible attackers. Ahmed Nazir shouted orders into his radio, demanding to know where the American aircraft was hiding, but his men reported empty skis. "Control, be advised we have unknown air support engaging hostile forces," Tank transmitted, his voice carrying a mixture of relief and bewilderment. "Repeat, unknown friendly aircraft is engaging targets with extreme precision." The response from his Tactical Operations Center was immediate and confused. "Sabre 6-1, negative on air support in your area. Confirm your last transmission." Tank watched another enemy position erupting in flames and shook his head. Someone was lying, or someone was operating outside normal command structure. Either way, he wasn't complaining. Ghost's voice returned to his headset, calm and reassuring. "Sabre 6-1, maintain current position. I'm clearing your exit route now." She spoke with the confidence of someone who'd done this before, someone who understood that warfare was as much about timing as firepower. Each target she eliminated was chosen not just for immediate threat level, but for its impact on enemy morale and tactical cohesion. The fourth explosion sent a ripple of fear through the Taliban ranks. Fighters who'd been advancing on the SEALs' position began falling back, their assault degrading into confused retreat. Whatever was hunting them from the sky, it could see them perfectly while remaining completely invisible. Tank allowed himself a slight smile as he watched the enemy's organized attack dissolve into chaos. Whoever this ghost was, she was about to earn a place in SEAL legend. Ahmed Nazir's world was collapsing one explosion at a time. His carefully planned ambush had turned into a nightmare of invisible death raining from an empty sky. 3 of his heavy weapons teams had been eliminated in as many minutes, each destroyed by ordnance that appeared without warning or sound. "Where is it coming from?" he screamed into his radio, his voice cracking with frustration and growing fear. His men were veterans of 20 years of asymmetric warfare, but they'd never faced an enemy they couldn't see, hear, or target. The answer came in the form of another precision strike. His mortar team, positioned in what should have been a hidden depression behind the northern ridge, erupted in a ball of orange flame. The explosion was so precise that rocks 50 meters away remained undisturbed, while the mortar tube twisted into abstract metal sculpture. 6 miles overhead, Ghost monitored the battle's progression with clinical detachment. Her targeting systems had identified 32 remaining hostiles, each one tagged and categorized by threat level. The F-35's advanced sensors could distinguish between combatants and non-combatants, between armed fighters and village civilians who might be hiding nearby. "Sabre 6-1, I'm seeing movement to your northwest," she transmitted. "Squad-sized element attempting to flank your position." Tank swiveled his rifle toward the indicated direction, spotting muzzle flashes in the darkness. "Confirmed, Ghost. Can you service that target?" "Already painting it," Ghost replied, her voice carrying the satisfaction of a professional at work. "Danger close in 5 seconds." The precision of her warning allowed Tank to pull his team back just as another explosion rewrote the landscape. The flanking element simply ceased to exist, their tactical maneuver interrupted by 200 pounds of high explosives delivered with mathematical accuracy. Ghost had been studying this type of engagement for months during classified war games at Nellie's. The F-35's stealth capabilities weren't just about avoiding detection, they were about psychological warfare. An enemy that couldn't identify or engage the source of incoming fire would eventually break under the stress of helplessness. The Taliban fighters were experiencing exactly that breakdown. Radio chatter intercepted by Ghost's electronic warfare systems revealed growing panic among the remaining forces. Terms like "invisible devil" and "ghost plane" began appearing in their communications, along with increasingly frantic calls for withdrawal. "Control, this is Ghost," she transmitted on her secure channel. "Battlefield conditions are shifting in favor of friendly forces. Request permission to continue engagement." The response was immediate but puzzled. "Ghost, we show no aircraft in that airspace. Confirm your position and mission authorization." Ghost smiled grimly inside her helmet. The F-35 program's classification levels meant that even friendly forces weren't always aware of her presence. She was operating in a gray zone between official missions and off-the-books support, authorized by commanders who couldn't acknowledge her existence. "Control, disregard previous transmission," she replied. "Ghost is not in the area." Below, Tank watched the enemy's assault crumble as invisible precision strikes continued eliminating tactical positions with surgical accuracy. The ammunition supply point explosion could be seen for 30 miles across the Afghan countryside. Ghost's AGM-158 Joint Air-to-Surface Standoff missile had found its target with characteristic precision, turning the Taliban's main resupply cache into a brief, brilliant star that illuminated the entire valley. Secondary explosions followed as stored RPGs and machine gun ammunition cooked off in a violent symphony of destruction. Ahmed Nazir felt the shockwave through the stone beneath his feet and knew the battle was lost. Half his force had been eliminated by an enemy he couldn't see, couldn't hear, and couldn't fight. His remaining fighters were already beginning to melt away into the mountains, their discipline shattered by the psychological impact of facing an invisible opponent. Through her advanced sensors, Ghost watched the enemy's tactical collapse with professional satisfaction. This was exactly how stealth technology was supposed to function, not just as a means of avoiding detection, but as a force multiplier that turned conventional engagements into one-sided demonstrations of technological superiority. "Sabre 6-1, the party's winding down," she transmitted to Tank. "I count 14 hostiles remaining, all in full retreat. Your exit route is clear." Tank looked through his scope at the devastation surrounding their position. In less than 20 minutes, a force of nearly 50 enemy fighters had been reduced to scattered individuals fleeing across rocky terrain. He'd witnessed precision airstrikes before, but nothing approaching this level of surgical accuracy. "Ghost, how copy on our location for extraction?" Tank asked, his tactical mind already shifting to the next phase of their operation. "I've got you painted in high definition," Ghost replied, her F-35 sensors tracking each SEAL's individual heat signature. "Extraction bird is 20 minutes out. I'll maintain overwatch until you're airborne." The distant whop-whop-whop of helicopter rotors began echoing off the valley walls as two MH-60 Black Hawks approached from the south. Ghost Secure Communications had summoned the extraction team while simultaneously coordinating her own strikes, a level of multitasking that required both technological sophistication and exceptional piloting skills. Corpsman Akaffer finished treating Sullivan's wounds and looked up at the empty sky with newfound respect. "Who do you think she is?" she asked Tank quietly. Tank had been wondering the same thing. The voice on the radio belonged to someone young, probably early 30s, with a slight accent he couldn't place. More importantly, she flew with the confidence of someone who'd done this many times before. Special operations pilots were an elite brotherhood, but this level of capability suggested something beyond conventional training. "Someone who's very good at her job," Tank replied, watching the last Taliban fighters disappear into the mountain passes. "Someone we're damn lucky to have on our side." High above, Ghost began her own extraction, banking the F-35 toward the southwest and friendly airspace. Her mission computers automatically logged the engagement. 14 precision strikes, 0 civilian casualties, 8 American lives saved. The numbers would be buried in classified after-action reports that few would ever read. But Tank Rodriguez would remember that voice for the rest of his life. the guardian angel who'd materialized from an empty sky when hope was running out. The Black Hawks settled into the rocky landing zone with practiced precision, their pilots wearing night vision goggles that turned the moonless Afghan night into shades of green clarity. Tank's team moved with efficient urgency, carrying their wounded and maintaining defensive positions even as salvation approached on twin rotors. "Load up, we're leaving this party," Tank called out, his voice carrying the relief of a man who'd stared death in the face and lived to tell about it. The SEALs moved like shadows, their training taking over even as adrenaline coursed through their systems. They'd survived the unsurvivable, and everyone knew it. As the helicopters lifted off, Tank pressed his headset and transmitted one final message. "Ghost, this is Sabre 6-1. We owe you one." The response came back immediately, tinged with what might have been amusement. "Just doing my job, boys. Stay safe out there." But Ghost wasn't done with her job. As the Black Hawks disappeared toward friendly territory, she maintained her patrol pattern, her F-35 sensors sweeping the landscape for any signs of regrouping enemy forces. The mission brief had mentioned possible high-value targets in the area, and her advanced reconnaissance capabilities were perfectly suited for intelligence gathering. 3,000 miles away, in a sterile briefing room beneath the Pentagon, Major General Patricia Hayes was reviewing real-time data feeds from the engagement. The F-35 sensor package had transmitted detailed intelligence about Taliban force composition, equipment, and tactical capabilities. But what intrigued Hayes more was the pilot's performance under pressure. Lieutenant Colonel Artemis Volkov had been handpicked for the stealth program not because of political correctness or diversity quotas, but because her psychological profile indicated an unusual combination of technical brilliance and operational intuition. Tonight's engagement was proving those assessments correct. Ghost's aircraft designation was officially listed as training exercise, and her presence in Afghan airspace was buried under layers of classification that would keep congressional oversight committees confused for years. The F-35 program was still technically in development, and live combat testing was both necessary and politically sensitive. "Outstanding work, Ghost," came the transmission from her actual control station, a mobile command unit positioned 300 miles away in Pakistani airspace. "RTB when ready." Return to base. The most beautiful words in military aviation, especially after a successful mission. Ghost felt the familiar satisfaction of a job well done as she began her transit back to the classified facility that didn't officially exist on any military maps. The F-35's autopilot engaged for the long flight home, allowing Ghost to reflect on the engagement. 8 American soldiers were alive because of her intervention, and a significant Taliban force had been neutralized without collateral damage. The mission parameters had been met with mathematical precision. But as she watched the Afghan landscape pass beneath her aircraft's belly, Ghost couldn't shake the feeling that tonight had been about more than tactical success. Something in Tank's voice, gratitude mixed with bewilderment, reminded her why she'd chosen this profession. The radio remained quiet as she flew toward tomorrow, carrying classified capabilities into an uncertain future. The MH-60 Black Hawks touched down at Forward Operating Base Chapman as dawn painted the eastern mountains in shades of gold and amber. Tank's team disembarked with the measured movements of professionals who'd survived another night in hell, their gear still warm from recent combat, and their eyes carrying the 1,000-yard stare of men who'd seen the impossible. Corpsman Akaffer immediately escorted Sullivan to the base medical facility, his shrapnel wounds requiring more comprehensive treatment than field medicine could provide. The rest of the team moved through standard post-mission procedures with mechanical efficiency, weapons cleaning, equipment accountability, preliminary debriefing, but their minds remained fixed on the mysterious air support that had materialized from nowhere. "Tank, you need to hear this," called out Chief Petty Officer Michael Preacher Thompson, holding a satellite phone with a confused expression. Thompson had been coordinating with their Tactical Operations Center, trying to piece together the chain of events that had saved their lives. Control says there were no air assets in our sector last night. Tank paused in the middle of field stripping his rifle, a maintenance ritual that usually helped process the adrenaline aftermath of combat operations. Say again. No aircraft, no air support missions, no F-16s, no A-10s, no armed drones. Thompson's weathered face carried the expression of a 20-year veteran who'd seen enough military bureaucracy to know when someone was lying. According to official records, we extracted ourselves. The implications hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Either their entire team had experienced a collective hallucination, or someone with significant authority was operating outside normal command structures. In Tank's experience, the military didn't misplace fighter jets or forget about close air support missions. "What about the explosions?" asked Petty Officer Harrison, his young face still pale from the night's events. "The whole damn mountain lit up like the 4th of July." Thompson shrugged with the eloquent gesture of a career NCO who'd learned not to question mysteries above his pay grade. Officially, Taliban ammunition depot suffered an accidental detonation, pure coincidence that it happened to save our asses. 200 miles away, Ghost was undergoing her own debriefing in a facility that existed in the gaps between official military installations. The hangar bore no identifying markings, the personnel wore no rank insignia, and the aircraft parked in climate-controlled bays were painted in colors that didn't appear on any regulation charts. "Exceptional work, Lieutenant Colonel," said the man reviewing her mission data. Colonel James Hartwell commanded a unit that didn't appear on organizational charts, funded through budget lines that congressional staffers never questioned. 8 friendly forces extracted with 0 casualties. 33 hostile forces neutralized with 0 collateral damage. Ghost nodded, her helmet still carrying the faint chemical smell of oxygen and electronics. The SEALs performed admirably under pressure. Their tactical discipline allowed for precision engagement. What she didn't mention was the satisfaction she'd felt hearing Tank's voice over the radio, the gratitude of a professional soldier who'd been pulled back from the edge of disaster. Those moments of human connection were what made the classified missions worthwhile. Hartwell consulted his tablet, reviewing telemetry data that would be analyzed by Pentagon strategists for months. The F-35's performance exceeded projected parameters. Stealth capabilities, sensor integration, targeting accuracy, all optimal. The words were clinical, reducing a life-or-death engagement to statistical measurements. But Ghost understood the subtext. Her aircraft and skills had just proven themselves in live combat conditions against a determined enemy. The F-35 program had passed a crucial test, and her role as test pilot had evolved into something approaching combat legend. The debriefing continued for 2 hours, covering everything from ammunition expenditure to electronic warfare effectiveness. Ghost answered each question with professional precision, but her mind kept returning to the voices she'd heard over the radio, 8 men who'd trusted an invisible guardian to bring them home. As she finally walked toward her quarters, Ghost reflected on the strange nature of her service. She flew the most advanced fighter aircraft in human history, wielded capabilities that bordered on science fiction, and operated in missions that officially never happened. Yet the satisfaction remained fundamentally human. She kept good people alive in bad circumstances. The sun was rising over the mountains as she removed her flight suit, hanging it in a locker beside equipment that would one day revolutionize aerial warfare. Tomorrow would bring new missions, new challenges, new opportunities to prove that technology was only as effective as the human intelligence guiding it. In a few hours, Tank Rodriguez would be writing an after-action report that mentioned possible equipment malfunction causing friendly fire from unknown source. The truth would remain classified for decades, if it ever emerged at all. But both pilot and ground team would carry the memory of that night for the rest of their lives. The moment when invisible technology and human courage combined to turn certain defeat into impossible victory. The classified briefing room beneath Langley Air Force Base hummed with quiet efficiency as intelligence analysts reviewed overnight operations across 3 continents. Major General Patricia Hayes studied the Afghan incident report with the focused attention of someone who'd spent 30 years learning to read between heavily redacted lines. "Gentlemen," she addressed the room, though her eyes remained fixed on Ghost's mission telemetry, "we have an anomaly that requires discussion." The assembled officers, representing Air Force Intelligence, Joint Special Operations Command, and the Office of the Secretary of Defense, shifted in their chairs with the uncomfortable recognition that anomalies in the military typically meant someone's career was about to change dramatically. At 2:47 hours local time, a Navy SEAL team designated Sabre 6-1 was extracted from hostile territory following what appears to be close air support from an unidentified aircraft. Hayes manipulated the room's digital display, showing satellite imagery of the engagement area. Official records indicate no air assets were operating in that sector. Colonel David Kessler from JSOC leaned forward, his scarred hands folded on the polished conference table. "General, are we looking at a possible friendly fire incident? Could one of our allies have provided support without coordination?" Hayes shook her head, advancing to the next slide. "Negative. The precision and timing suggest advanced targeting systems beyond current Allied capabilities. We're looking at 33 enemy positions neutralized with 0 collateral damage over a 17-minute engagement window." The room fell silent as the implication sank in. That level of accuracy required not just advanced weaponry, but real-time intelligence and fire control systems that existed in very few aircraft worldwide. The mathematical probability of achieving such results without advanced stealth and sensor integration was approaching 0. "Ma'am," ventured Captain Lisa Rodriguez from Air Force Intelligence, "could this be related to the F-35 development program? I understand there have been unofficial capability demonstrations." The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Everyone in the room held security clearances high enough to know that black programs existed, but discussing them required careful navigation of classification boundaries. Hayes consulted her notes with deliberate slowness. The pilot identification remains classified, but preliminary analysis suggests someone with exceptional training and access to developmental aircraft systems. What she didn't say was that she'd personally recommended Artemis Volkov for the stealth program 18 months earlier. The young pilot's combination of technical brilliance and operational intuition had impressed evaluation committees, but her real-world performance was exceeding even optimistic projections. 1,200 miles away, Tank Rodriguez was discovering that heroes weren't always what you expected. His team's after-action interviews had been conducted by intelligence specialists who seemed more interested in what they hadn't seen than what they had. The official report would classify their extraction as a successful tactical withdrawal following equipment malfunction. "So we're not supposed to talk about the guardian angel?" asked Corpsman Akaffer, her medical training making her naturally skeptical of official explanations that ignored obvious evidence. Tank looked around the secure briefing room, nodding the subtle indicators that their conversation was being recorded. "We're supposed to be grateful we're alive and not ask too many questions about how that happened." The message was clear. Someone with significant authority wanted the incident forgotten, buried under layers of classification and bureaucratic opacity. But you couldn't erase the memory of hearing that calm voice on the radio, or watching enemy positions disappear with impossible precision. Military institutions had their own rhythms and rituals, their own ways of acknowledging exceptional performance while maintaining operational security. Ghost's intervention would become legend among the special operations community, passed down through informal networks of professionals who understood that some of the best stories couldn't be officially told. In her quarters at the unnamed facility, Ghost reviewed mission footage on a secure tablet, analyzing her own performance with the critical eye of a professional perfectionist. Each targeting decision was scrutinized, each communication timed and evaluated for effectiveness. She'd saved 8 lives tonight, but more importantly, she'd proven that the F-35 could deliver on its revolutionary promises. The aircraft wasn't just an advanced fighter, it was a paradigm shift in how aerial warfare could be conducted. Outside her window, the sun climbed higher over mountains that had witnessed 20 years of continuous warfare. Ghost closed her eyes and tried to sleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring new missions and new opportunities to prove that the future of combat aviation had arrived. The sound of rotors echoed across forward operating Base Chapman as another mission launched into the Afghan night, carrying soldiers who would never know they were protected by capabilities that officially didn't exist. Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Hammer Martinez had been flying combat missions for 15 years, accumulating 1,247 hours in F-16 Fighting Falcons across 4 deployments, when she first heard whispers about Ghost in the pilot's lounge at Bagram Airfield. The stories always followed the same pattern: impossible precision, invisible aircraft, mysterious radio calls that saved American lives when conventional air support had failed. "Complete bullshit," Martinez declared to the assembled pilots, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd earned her call sign by consistently delivering overwhelming firepower exactly where needed. "There's no such thing as invisible aircraft. Physics doesn't work that way." The other pilots nodded agreement, but their expressions carried the uncertainty of professionals who'd all heard similar stories from credible sources. Captain Rick "Viper" Thompson had personally debriefed a Marine unit that swore they'd received air support from an aircraft that never appeared on radar. Major Susan Blade Kim had intercepted radio transmissions from Taliban forces describing attacks by ghost planes that materialized from empty sky. "Maybe it's some kind of drone program," suggested Lieutenant Jack "Rookie" Foster, the youngest pilot in their squadron. "Something classified that they're not telling us about." Martinez shook her head dismissively. "Drones don't carry the payload necessary for the kind of destruction we're hearing about, and they sure as hell don't provide real-time tactical coordination like experienced pilots are describing." What Martinez didn't know was that Ghost was listening to their conversation through electronic surveillance systems that monitored all communications within 50 miles of her patrol area. The F-35's advanced electronic warfare capabilities weren't just defensive. They provided comprehensive intelligence about friendly force positions, communications, and operational status. Ghost found herself oddly touched by the pilot's speculation about her existence. She'd spent most of her career being underestimated or dismissed, and hearing seasoned combat veterans struggle to understand her capabilities was a strange form of validation. "Control, this is Ghost," she transmitted on a secure frequency that bypassed normal military communications. "I'm monitoring pilot chatter at Bagram. Recommend increasing operational security protocols." The response came from Colonel Hartwell himself. "Ghost, let them talk. Reputation is a weapon too." It was a lesson Ghost had learned through years of being the only woman in various elite programs. Sometimes allowing others to underestimate you was the greatest tactical advantage you could possess. While other pilots debated whether she existed, she was accumulating mission successes that would eventually reshape how aerial warfare was conducted. Her aircraft's sensors painted a detailed picture of the airspace around Bagram, tracking the F-16s as they prepared for their own missions. Each pilot had their own call sign, their own personality, their own approach to combat flying. But they were all operating within conventional paradigms, limited by aircraft that appeared on radar screens and followed predictable flight patterns. Ghost's F-35 existed in a different realm entirely, a space between what was possible and what was officially acknowledged. She was writing the tactics manual for a new generation of warfare, one engagement at a time. Back at Bagram, Martinez was preparing for her own mission when her flight leader pulled her aside with a serious expression. "Hammer, I just got word from higher up. If you encounter any unusual air support during tonight's operation, you're to report it through special channels only." Martinez raised an eyebrow. "Special channels? Classification above our pay grade. Just remember, some conversations are more sensitive than others." The message was clear. Ghost wasn't just rumor anymore. She was becoming policy. 2 weeks after the Sabre 6-1 extraction, Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez found himself in another impossible situation. This time, his 8-man team was providing overwatch for a humanitarian aid convoy that had been ambushed 15 kilometers south of Kandahar. The convoy's military escort had been decimated in the initial attack, leaving 43 civilian contractors and aid workers pinned down in a kill zone designed with lethal efficiency. "Control, this is Sabre 6-1. We need immediate air support," Tank transmitted, his voice tight with controlled urgency. Through his rifle scope, he could see enemy fighters maneuvering to complete their encirclement of the convoy. "We have approximately 60 hostiles with heavy weapons, danger close to civilian personnel." The response carried the familiar frustration of overextended military resources. "Sabre 6-1, closest air support is 30 minutes out. Can you maintain position?" Tank looked at the tactical situation and knew 30 minutes might as well be 30 hours. The ambush site had been chosen perfectly, a narrow valley with limited cover and no escape routes. The enemy had positioned themselves to maximize civilian casualties while minimizing their own exposure to returning fire. "Negative control, we won't last 30 minutes. That's when the radio crackled with a voice that sent relief flooding through Tank's system. "Sabre 6-1, this is Ghost. I'm in your neighborhood again. Looks like you could use some help." Tank actually smiled, pressing his back against the armored vehicle he was using for cover. "Ghost, outstanding to hear your voice. We've got civilians in the mix this time. Need precise fires only." "Copy that. I can see the convoy from up here. 41 civilians, 3 wounded, surrounded by 58 hostiles with RPGs and machine guns." Ghost's voice carried the calm confidence of someone reading from a detailed intelligence report. "I'm going to need you to mark friendly positions with infrared strobes." The level of tactical awareness in her voice was staggering. Ghost wasn't just providing air support. She was conducting real-time battlefield intelligence, distinguishing between combatants and non-combatants from an altitude that should have made such discrimination impossible. Tank activated his team's infrared markers, knowing that Ghost's advanced sensors could probably distinguish individual faces from her altitude. The technology gap between conventional aircraft and whatever she was flying had become a tactical revolution. "Ghost, be advised we have women and children in the convoy," Tank added, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd seen too many civilian casualties. "These are doctors and teachers heading to rural clinics." "Understood. I've got positive identification on all friendly personnel. Beginning engagement in 30 seconds." The first strike eliminated a machine gun nest positioned on the valley's eastern rim with characteristic precision. No warning, no aircraft noise, no visible ordnance, just a sudden explosion that removed the threat with surgical accuracy. The Taliban fighters manning adjacent positions looked around in confusion, unable to identify the source of the attack. But this engagement was different from the previous encounter. The presence of civilians added layers of complexity that tested every aspect of Ghost's training and her aircraft's capabilities. Each targeting decision carried the potential for catastrophic consequences if she miscalculated by even a few meters. Through her advanced sensors, Ghost could see the convoy's passengers, aid workers who'd volunteered to bring medical supplies and educational materials to remote villages. Their infrared signatures showed elevated stress levels, but they were maintaining discipline despite being caught in a firefight that could end their humanitarian mission permanently. Sabre 6-1, I'm going to create an exit route for the convoy, Ghost transmitted. On my mark, have them move due south at maximum speed. Tank relayed the instructions to the convoy commander, a 60-year-old retired Army colonel named Robert Hayes who'd been organizing humanitarian missions for 7 years. Hayes had survived 2 previous ambushes and knew that salvation could come from unexpected sources. The second explosion,